colleague, the junior senator from Kentucky. I'd like to ask him to share his perspective on why this is necessary. And so I asked Senator Paul, why do you think this is so important for us to have this amendment right now?
Well, I think Congress has failed. You know, we haven't passed a budget up here in 2 years, much less a balanced budget. So we can't even pass a budget under the normal procedures, and we're showing no signs of being able to balance our own budget. They say that the American public, when you ask them, are you for a balanced budget? 70 to 75% of the people are for it, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Now, Congress currently has about a 10% approval rating. My thought is maybe our approval rating is so low because we're not listening to what the people want. The people want us to balance our budget. They want us to do the responsible thing. But they also don't want to say, oh, Social Security, we're going to put that off to the side. They want the Social Security fund to be sound, too. What are we doing right now? We're reducing the funding to Social Security. We're doing exactly the things that we shouldn't be doing up here. So I think it is important, as you said, that the balanced budget needs to include all of spending, and we need to balance our budget.
If the Congress, which consists of a Senate and the House, and if members of the Senate and the House are elected representatives of the people who stand for re-election at regular intervals, and if the American voting public overwhelmingly supports a balanced budget amendment, why then haven't we passed it and given the states the opportunity to ratify an amendment like this?
Well, you know, the big driving force up here is entitlements. The interesting thing is, if you look at the revenue coming into government, it's all being spent on entitlements and interest. 40% of every dollar is being borrowed, but that means we're having to borrow all the money for national defense, for our roads, for all the rest of government. 40% of every dollar, $40,000 a second is being borrowed. Why don't we come to an agreement? I've been asking many people on the other side that, and they say, well, we will not fix entitlements until we have a $1 trillion tax increase. Well, if that's the starting point, we're never going to fix entitlements, because many of us think raising taxes is a mistake in the middle of a recession, and we think the more money left in the private sector would be better for jobs. So we have this balanced budget debate, but we also, as part of that, have to figure out how to reduce spending, and that's in the entitlement programs because they consume 60% of the budget. But there's this unwillingness up here, and I think people would like us to find solutions. When I go home to my state, doesn't matter whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, they want us to fix the entitlement programs, but they don't want it to be dependent on increasing taxes on everyone also.
What's your sense as to how the various state legislatures are likely to respond to a constitutional amendment proposed by both houses of Congress? You think they'd likely ratify such an amendment by the necessary 3/4 margin?
In the last year, I went and spoke before my state legislature to a joint session of the House and Senate, and there was overwhelming support for a balanced budget amendment. And in fact, I think there's actually a movement out there to do it if we don't do it. There's so much feeling among the public that this enormous debt is hurting us. You know, when I go home and I talk to people, I say, look, the debt, the people that the debt hurts the worst are those on fixed income, senior citizens, and those in the working class. Those are the people being hurt by this debt because it causes rising prices as we print the new money. Those people are hurt every time they go buy gas at the pump, every time they go to the grocery store. So the rising prices are really hurting senior citizens and the working class. The only way we're going to fix it is to have rules that must be obeyed.
So they're paying for Washington's fiscal irresponsibility in the form of job losses, in the form of increased prices for goods and for services, and in the form of inflation. It's likewise my experience with my state legislature that they seem to be very supportive of it. In fact, I have a document here signed by the legislative leaders of my state, by Governor Gary Herbert, by Utah House of Representatives Speaker Rebecca Lockhart, and by Utah State Senate President Michael Wattops. It concludes essentially as follows. They say, quote, "We urge the United States Senate and House of Representatives to pass a balanced budget amendment and send it to the states for ratification. Additionally, we urge Congress to make Utah's concurrent resolution part of the congressional record." They also proceed to explain why they feel so strongly about this. They say, not only for our own sake, but for future generations as well, the states must now combine in an unwavering resolve with convincing action to put the nation's financial house in order, Passage of your own state's resolution urging the support for a balanced budget amendment can help make this happen. Please join with Utah and call upon Congress immediately to pass a balanced budget amendment. We respectfully encourage you and urge your congressional delegation to act in your behalf. So they're calling not only on Congress, but also on their fellow state legislators throughout the country to urge this same action from Congress. And in the same breath, they also adopted and they supported wholeheartedly the specific balanced budget amendment proposal that is found in Senate Joint Resolution 10. I thank them for doing that, and I think they reflect views of so many of our state legislatures, which balance their budgets every single year. Most of them do. And it's not news when they do it. It's not news because it's what's expected. It's what's expected because that's what they do. I look forward to the day and age when it's no longer news, when Congress balances its budget. Senator Paul, I'd like to ask you another question. Why is it that so many are fond of saying, as our president has recently said, we don't need a balanced budget amendment. What we need is for Congress to just do its job? Why isn't that enough to carry the day?
The problem is in the past we have had rules, as you mentioned, Graham-Rudman-Hollings, pay-as-you-go. I think pay-as-you-go, when it was passed in the late 1990s, was broken 700 times. There doesn't seem to be the spine or the willpower to say no up here. Everybody wants something from government, but they don't realize that by getting things from government that we don't pay for, that the debt has ramifications. You know, Admiral Mullins said last year that the biggest threat to our national security right now is our debt. Erskine Bowles, who is the head of the Debt Commission, said that the most predictable crisis in our history that's coming is going to be a debt crisis. So for those who will oppose a balanced budget on the other side, they will need to explain to the American people when chaotic situations come and we're having trouble paying for those things that come from government, when the value of the money is destroyed and when prices are rising dramatically, they will have to explain to the American people why they thought it wasn't necessary to balance the budget. And I've seen no willpower to attack entitlements. I've seen no will. There are simple ways. We could gradually raise the age of the entitlement eligibility and means test the benefits. We could fix Social Security tomorrow. We could fix Medicare tomorrow. But the other side is unwilling to talk about entitlement reform unless they feel like they are owed some obligation of raising taxes by $1 trillion. That would be a disaster for the economy. And it's beyond me why the other side will not say, let's fix Social Security. What would it take to fix Social Security? What would it take to fix Medicare? I think we could fix all of these problems, but I don't think the dialogue is there. I've been trying to ask questions to the other side for months now, and we aren't getting anywhere.
I think most members of Congress would acknowledge that their constituents want the federal budget balanced. Why isn't it enough for us just to tell members of Congress, please balance it? We don't want to have to restrict your authority. We don't want to have to take the keys away from the irresponsible driver. We just want you to be responsible. Why doesn't that work?
I think it's because so much of government spending is considered to be mandatory, and so it just keeps enlarging and expanding. And also because people have, great big hearts and they want to help everyone, but they don't realize the ramifications of accumulating such a massive debt. As you accumulate this debt, there are ramifications. There are higher prices. There's also the threat of an economic collapse. There's the threat of an entire country. Greece is going under. Italy's behind them, Portugal, Spain, they're struggling under this burden of debt. And they say when a country's debt equals its economy, when a country's debt is about 100% of its gross domestic product, that you're losing 1 million jobs a year. Our debt is stealing American jobs. It's making us weaker as a country. It's making us vulnerable. It's making our national security vulnerable. But we have to do something, and there's no evidence. We can't even in this body pass a budget, much less a balanced budget. So I think everything about this body shows a failure to be fiscally responsible and that we need stronger rules.
Perhaps it is inherent in the institution itself, in the forces at play, that have made Congress uniquely vulnerable to this kind of massive deficit spending. But whatever the reason, we know that Congress isn't willing, isn't able, or at least in recent years has not been inclined, except in rare, unusual circumstances, to balance its own budget. That being the case, we can't assume that Congress will all of a sudden start doing its job, as those who have used this argument have insisted. Part of Congress's job, as Congress has come to perceive it, is to engage in deficit spending. One of Congress's powers, as members of Congress who read the Constitution will point out, is to borrow money on credit of the United States. And so it isn't enough simply to say, Congress, do your job, because it has regarded this kind of massive deficit as consistent with that mandate, consistent with that injunction. Meanwhile, Congress is continuing to occupy a larger and larger share of the American economy. We have to remember that for the first 150 years or so of our republic's existence, at the federal level, we were spending between 1% and 4% of gross domestic product at the federal national level, with only two brief exceptions, once during the Civil War and once during and in the immediate aftermath of World War I. But that all started to change in the 1930s, when we broke into double digits for the first time ever during peacetime. We've never really gone back. And now the federal government is spending about 25% of GDP annually. Roughly a quarter out of every dollar that moves through the American economy every year is taken out of the real economy by Washington. It's absorbed within the federal morass that is our government. That's a problem. That needs to change. I fear, I suspect, I firmly believe that it will not change until we take this power away, until we at least impose severe restrictions on Congress's borrowing power, because it has become part of Congress's nature to engage in this kind of out-of-control deficit spending. Senator Paul, I'd like to ask you another question. How do you think it would impact the lives of Americans, of Kentuckians, on a day-to-day basis if we were to pass an amendment like this and have it ratified by the states?
You know, the people maintain that they're for jobs, they're for getting the economy growing again. If we were to pass a balanced budget amendment and send it to the states this year, it would create more jobs and create a better psychology than we've had in this country in decades. I think you would see a rise in the stock market like you've never seen before if we said to Wall Street and we said to investors worldwide, we are going to balance our budget. We are not going to spend more than we take in. I think you'd see an economic recovery begin like you've never seen in this country, and I think you'd see millions of jobs created. That's why we have to do this. The American people want it. And what amazes me about this debate is we're going to have this debate and have this vote, and the vast majority of the other side has said they will not vote for a balanced budget amendment. So I say take that home. Tell your people at home that you are opposed to balancing the budget, and let's run on that, and let's see who wins the elections in the future, because our country's future depends on this, on balancing our budget and controlling the debt, and I hope we don't wake up when it's too late.
I couldn't agree more with that assessment, and I think it's important for us to remind our colleagues that because the American people overwhelmingly support this, by a margin of about 75%, according to a recent CNN poll, those who oppose it, those who are members of this body, who are of our sister body, the U.S. House of Representatives, just down the hall, who choose not to support it, will do so, will cast their no vote at their own political peril, because the American people are standing up and they are demanding more. They understand that, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, he'll cheat without scruple who can without fear. When Congress is free to spend more than it takes in every single year without political consequence, bad things happen. Congress starts to manipulate more and more of the economy. And that is something that the American people understand is hurtful rather than helpful to them, to the people on the ground, to the person who's unemployed and looking for a job, for the person who's underemployed or underpaid for the work that he does, for the single mother who's just worried about taking care of her children, for the grandparents who are worried about the future of their grandchildren, worried about the fact that for the first time in American history, Americans fear that their posterity will enjoy a lower standard of living than what they have enjoyed. All of this is due to the fact that Congress has known no real boundaries to its authority and recognized no real limits on its ability to spend your hard-earned money. This has real consequences. But we can forestall those negative consequences right now if we will act to restrict on a permanent and structural basis Congress's ability to engage in deficit spending. Accept no imitations. Beware of the Trojan horse balanced budget amendment, the one that can be circumvented easily by a simple majority vote. Beware of the balanced budget amendment that doesn't limit as a percentage of GDP Congress's ability to spend money. We look out for these principles. We get this balanced budget amendment passed, submit it to the states for ratification. They will ratify it, and we will find that our best days as Americans are yet ahead of us. I urge my colleagues to cast a vote in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 10. Thank you, Mr. President.